I think we are ready. Let's start. Welcome everyone to this webinar. This is already the third session this morning, and as you probably, many of the participants, you are still entering. Hello everybody. As many of you know, this is the final multiplier event of our research project, our European project. I am Montserrat Castelló, the PI of the project, and it's a project that focuses on researcher identity development, and particularly we are interested in early career researcher development. So when I say we, when I refer to we, I refer to a team of researchers from different countries, European countries, working together for almost 10 years now and doing empirical research, offering resources and training all over the world. So we invite you to visit if you have done it yet. Our website, you can see it here in the screen, www.researcheridentity.com. And especially we invite you to join our social network, which is still a beta version, but we invite you to enter into this social network, which is called Researchers Like Me, and it's a social site aiming at grouping researchers like us, so early career researchers, where to find help, discuss thematic issues, and share some resources. So it's just starting, as I said, it's a beta version, but the number of participants is growing, and the only way to say or to realize if it's working is to be there and try to see how it works. So send us feedback and impressions. So we really want the site to be useful for all of you. As I said, this is the third session. I'm very happy to have here Matthew Tata as representative of Eurodoc. Eurodoc is a stakeholder of the project and is the European Association of Researchers. To talk about, well, I would say the core issue of this event, which is the uncertainty of careers. So how to sustain careers, research careers, and employability. And we were just chatting now with Matthew that he thinks he's a good representative of this postdoc situation and well, looking for sustainable career. Well, more than 5 years ago, we were talking already about academic and research career as a risk career. Now it's, I would say, even more risky. So it's the uncertainty is bigger than before, and the situation is, well, maybe also it's time for us to look at opportunities of this uncertainty. So I like, as I did in the previous sessions, I like to share some data for you to know who are here today. So we are 140 registered participants for this session from 31 countries. That's diversity of participants here from Africa, Morocco, Nigeria. Hello, everyone from there. United States, South America, people from Mexico, Colombia. I guess it's not, or maybe it's too early in the morning for you. Australia, Asia, India, Pakistan, and of course people from Europe, all over the countries in Europe. The majority of attendants to these sessions, you are pre-docs. 1/3 of participants are doctoral program developers or program coordinators, and same, more or less, a little bit less of postdocs. As we did in previous sessions, Matthew will present the topic for 20 minutes, for the next 20 minutes. Then I'll pass the floor to you, the participants, and we will try to answer all the questions. Please, for questions, use the questions and answers panel that the tool is at the bottom of the screen. You can find it. And we will use the chat for interaction to the rest of participants, for commenting on, sharing information for other purposes than questions. Please, if you use the questions and answers tool, that will be easier for us to collect them, to group them, and to try to answer all of them. If we don't have time to answer all of them, then Matthew very kindly offered to answer them offline, and we will circulate a document among the participants with the rest of the answers that were unanswered or were remaining after the session. And I think this is all for the moment. So Matthew, the floor is yours. Thank you very much for being here today.
Thank you, Montserrat. I assume you can see me change my slides now. Great. So, hi everyone, good afternoon. Welcome from very grey Stockholm, Sweden. Thanks for joining this webinar and of course the event overall. My name is Matthew Tarter. I'm here on behalf of Eurodoc, that's the Council of Doctoral Candidates and Junior Researchers, which advocates for fair rights and career prospects, amongst other things, for ECRs in Europe. Of course, I'm delighted also that we have attendees here from around the world. I hope it isn't too Eurocentric for you today. We know that career development is probably the chief concern for early career researchers. So we hope today to pass on some of the collective knowledge Eurodoc has collated in the years that it's existed. So a little background, it's a non-profit organization based in Brussels, made of a federation of 30 national associations, which is run for and by early career researchers. And we think we advocate for nearly 1 million researchers across the continent. And it's funded by the member fees from those national associations. And as I said, run by volunteer researchers like myself. Our vision is a fair and sustainable research culture. And the mission to achieve that is to advocate for positive change in the policies, culture, and environment that ultimately affect that research culture. So we help develop policy on different topics that concern early career researchers, which are crystallized in the working groups you see on the screen right now. I myself coordinate the Employment and Career Development Working Group. And as I said, I hope to communicate some of what we've learned over the last few years. A little about me. Unfortunately, I'm from Great Britain. It's not a really wonderful thing to be these days, but I'm very happy to live and work in Stockholm, Sweden as a postdoctoral researcher. I'm passionate about researcher advocacy. I started off when I moved to Sweden as the chair of the local postdoc association. Now I'm the chair of the National Postdoc Association, as I mentioned. I'm also a board member in Eurodoc. I'm also preparing for my own career transition. So I like to think that whatever I communicate to you today is implicitly trustworthy, because there are steps and tips that I'm going to hopefully follow myself, or at least just to remain employable no matter what direction I happen to take. So the schedule for today will probably focus mostly on this first chunk, sustainable research careers, and then I'll finish off by talking a little bit about the precarious situation of researchers, the uncertainty as the event is titled, and also how that has been amplified in the last year. So this talk, I'm aware, as Montserrat said, that many of the attendees are themselves early career researchers, but it's important to recognize that the reforms and proposals we outline are things that the whole research sector needs to embrace overall. So of course, supervisors and principal investigators themselves need to support their early career researchers in whatever upskilling and diversifying experiences they wish to seek. Institutional staff and leadership are vital in putting local procedures and policies in place so that researchers have the infrastructure and accepting culture to succeed. And of course, at the top of this pyramid are national and international policymakers. We're talking ministries of education, funding agencies. Ultimately, they set the tone and govern the ultimate structure of the academic and research sector for us all to work in. So what do we mean by sustainable research careers? So this was actually forged after an active collaboration with the Marie Curie Alumni Association a couple of years ago, where both Eurodoc and Marie Curie Alumni Association held internal consultations and discussed what are the key issues and factors that either enable or hold back a sustainable career. And then these were condensed into a report, which you can obtain by scanning here. Don't worry if you can't get your QR scanner open on your phone. This code will appear in the top right corner in a few slides' time, and I will be posting a long list of different suggested reading and hyperlinks at the end of this talk. So don't worry about frantically taking photos and so on. So the first stop in sustainable research careers is that we need sustainable career prospects. And probably it's no surprise to most of us that there is very little funding available for the large number of researchers that we have in academia and research. So we have this short-term funding culture where we're only funded as long as a project is active for, and that creates this sort of temporary workforce. Also, the idea of the bottleneck, where there are fewer academic positions further on, further intensifies this precarity. And unfortunately, early career researchers are quite poor at planning a career outside of academia. I'll come on to mention perhaps why that is. And so we need to have those researchers engaging more in thinking about what they want to do. So to try and remedy this, we need long-term and sustainable funding tracks. Probably this is not something an early career researcher can govern themselves, but funding agencies need to invest more in people, not just in research questions, because research questions change, but ultimately people endure, and we need to ensure that researchers have that long-term vision ahead of them. We also need career tracking systems. By this, I mean surveys that you as a doctorate graduate fill out every year or every 2 years, telling whoever that what your career trajectory has looked like since then. This allows the funders and ministries to have a clearer idea of what a doctorate actually equips you for. What sort of employment prospects does it afford you? And finally, to help with this lack of career planning, we need to expose early career researchers early on to non-academic employers. Step 2 is that we need to deploy career management services. There's little guidance on alternative career paths, and unfortunately, a huge stigma persists around actually leaving academia. It's seen as quitting or dropping out, when in most other parts of the world or labor market, it would just be seen as changing direction. And unfortunately, the lack of options, the lack of planning, and the stigma impact heavily on well-being. So it was really nice to hear Kirsty speak earlier about how these integrate into an early career researcher's experience. To combat these problems, we have to implement services to support individual career pathways early on. So this could be career management services, but also individually tailored webinars and workshops to explain what different roles are available to an early career researcher. And we, of course, have to publicize career options and realities early on so that there is no stigma and researchers feel enabled to start something new. The third point is that researchers need a labor market awareness, and that has to come through networking and services, both inside and outside academia. So it's wonderful that researchers get the opportunity to have their own set of questions, but that level of specialization leads to isolation. You might have a very different set of priorities to the person sat next to you in the office. Also, network is only really driven by proactivity. I'm quite curious actually as to how the attendees came to find the event today, but in most cases, it requires quite a lot of searching or knowing the right people. And also something that I had not really considered properly myself was how disadvantaged researchers from outside the European Union are when they come to the EU or other European countries. So we need to provide mobility options. By that, I mean the opportunity to metaphorically go somewhere and experience something new. That could be done within the academic sector, maybe sampling a new research environment, or in a different sector, like going into public, private enterprise. We also need to make sure that there are systematic institute support mechanisms available. Those can be mental health, but they should also be systematic networking opportunities. And finally, we need to make sure we recognize and bridge these cultural differences that obviously hold back and create a lot of anxiety for what you might call a foreign researcher, and ensure we have a fair and equitable research sector for all. And the fourth, final, and by no means least point is the need to emphasize transferable skills and their recognition. And I'll dwell on this a bit in a few slides as well. So sadly, there is this large skills mismatch between the academic and non-academic worlds. And non-academic employers often say that researchers are not speaking their language. They're not communicating themselves in a way that non-academics really understand. And we know also that transferable skills afford you a sense of integrity. They make you look well-rounded, and that will ultimately keep you employable. So to try and combat this, we need to enrich researcher training with transferable skills. These can't just be things that you pick up, where you see them here and there. They need to be as standard in doctoral training and also postdoctoral experience as well. And as well, we need to make sure that transferable skills and community engagement are actually recognized during your own evaluation. They can't just be nice things that you add to your CV, but you should be rewarded when it comes to applying for grants, maybe for recruitment and promotion purposes too. So when we talk about transferable skills, what can an early career researcher develop? So the infographic you see here on the screen is the products of a report Iridoc produced in 2018 that tried to map out the various different transferable skills that most researchers felt they could obtain. And this is the result of internal consultation with all the different national associations around the continent. Don't worry about taking a photo of this. Again, I will put a link at the end where you can find the full report and a much higher resolution image. But take a quick glance at this, and obviously you probably are familiar with some of these major themes like research, career development, and digital. But actually there's a multitude of sub-skills within them, which you'd be surprised to find that you actually possess already. But if you aren't entirely sure about what you have, how do you know what transferable skills you actually have? So you can undertake a SWOT analysis, which is strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. It's a way of assessing what skills are actually your strong points. And perhaps you even have an idea of how to use your skills. So you have a tangible example, maybe an output from one of the skills that you have been employing during your life as a researcher. You then need to know how to connect those skills to a job. Sometimes that involves you going on a job advertisement and seeing what skills they're asking for, and seeing what do I have? Does that really fit with what's being expected of me? But that's obviously in the kind of job seeking stage. What about when you're actually trying to communicate those skills to show yourself as a competitive candidate? So a good example is, let's say you're sat in an interview and the interviewers want to know about your relevant expertise. A really good way of communicating your skills is using the STAR technique, which stands for situation, task, action, and result. So let's look at what that means in practice. So let's say that the position you're applying for, it's an academic role, and they say we want somebody with teaching skills. So you say that in the situation was you were a postdoc, you were expected to lecture students on the Python computer programming language. So to do this, you created course materials, delivered lectures, assessed their work, and ran discussion groups. And the net result, and the result really is what you have to communicate the most strongly, is that 95% of them passed over 3 years and you won a student award. That doesn't have to be just an academic trait. You can obviously then show what you've obtained in the academic sphere that could be applicable to industrial employers. Let's say the criteria is they want you to show that you have been involved in project management. Again, I'm using an example as a postdoc myself, that whilst I was a postdoc, I was expected to manage a research project so that it was on time and within budget. To achieve this, I created a project plan, identified milestones, and managed resources and personnel. And the result was that the project was delivered on time, in budget, and was successful enough that we could apply for future funding. And hopefully everything I just described doesn't feel too alien to you as early career researchers. Obviously, to doctoral candidates, maybe there are different kind of results or different actions that you were involved in your own project management, but really the principle of using STAR should not be difficult for any of us. Ultimately, you are more competitive than you think. Many of us doubt ourselves outside of a research environment, but the reality is that you are a Swiss Army knife of different competencies, and all it takes is a bit of self-reflection and you can start to see that. So tips for early career researchers, just as a summary slide, please complete these graduate tracking surveys. They're incredibly valuable. I know they feel like another survey and you just toss it in the trash, but they really help the academic sector overall understand actually how fit for purpose doctoral training is. Is it equipping these researchers with the ability to go and seek out the employment they desire? Also pursue independent funding streams. I know that research funding is difficult to come by, but if you can try and prove yourself as an independent applicant, maybe for a fellowship, then this will give you such security and viability further down the career path. Make sure you also engage with career management services and tools. If you can't do it in person like this year, then do it digitally. Zoom is a very good tool for being able to speak with people, and whilst it's not perfect, it is still very effective. Network beyond your office. You can't just have a LinkedIn phone book filled with only researchers. You need to know more people that can give you a diverse range of perspectives, and then check if mobility options are already present, maybe locally. Some universities do, internship placements where you can try a different field of work. And finally, use the STAR method to assess your transferable skills. So quickly, this is probably another 7 or 8 minutes. Just going to discuss, obviously, really the theme of today's event, also in the context of COVID-19, and just trying to stay employable throughout this period, which I know has been very difficult. So when we talk about precarity, we're talking about a group of researchers, a group of people rather, that are at risk. There are very few industries where you're in it and simultaneously there's very little upward mobility, and equally you can't also remain at the stage you're at. It's a very pressurized situation. So for, let's say once you've got your doctorate, you're in an increasingly large population of people that are competing for similar pots of money and are at the same time on these sequential fixed contracts. Eurodoc actually held a survey back in 2019. We had 1,800 respondents, different European countries and also scattered around the world, but they were researchers based in Europe at the time. We had questions on socio-demographic status, career development and well-being. I'm just going to give a very, very small microdose of the preliminary findings, which is that in most cases, the researchers we polled were interested in an academic career. Just over 1 in 2 wanted to follow the classical academic pathway to being a professor. 2 out of 3 remaining at least as a researcher, with plenty others wanting to pursue teaching or become a researcher outside of academia. But if we look at this first bar here, the sad reality was that many of the respondents actually lacked some of the really key prerequisites and support to pursue this career path. So only 3 out of 10 were actually recognized for supervising a student, which is a key measurable for showing yourself as a potential independent researcher. And just under 1 in 2 could apply for funding as the lead applicant. This needs to be 100%, otherwise these researchers really are going to struggle to prove themselves financially. Excuse me. And also, as you can see here on the right, our respondents report poor clarity about careers, lack of guidance or any kind of structure in most cases. And of course, as I mentioned, the bottleneck that mean we have fewer employment opportunities. So if you want to counteract the precarious situation you're in, you have to self-reflect and act, and it has to be done now. Like there is no perfect time. There is an imperfect time, which is at the last possible moment. So if you want to be inside academia, that's wonderful, but you must acknowledge the challenges. Perhaps do this with your supervisor or mentor. You need to understand what are the potential hurdles and barriers, so you can then seek the key measurables that allow you to overcome them. Like I mentioned before, being the lead applicant on a funding application. And of course, lobby for change. These things don't have to remain the same. We can change the academic sector for better, much like the efforts of the Researcher Identity Development Project, and we can try and ensure that everyone has the best possible chance to succeed. If you're considering a non-academic role, that is wonderful. You must ignore the stigma. Academia has been treated kind of like a cult for many years, that you're a failure if you step outside its walls. You're only a failure if you don't live up to your own values and meet your own personal ambitions. It doesn't matter what people think about leaving academia, it's not quitting. Make sure you develop transferable skills though. They can be done for academia or outside of it. They just show you, as I said, a well-rounded individual, and ensure you have a network that will help you find your next position. And finally, obviously, this is no surprise to you, this year has been pretty unprecedented in nature, and unfortunately, early career researchers have not been spared the disruption. In particular, different groups like women researchers have been really disadvantaged. I think there's a talk this afternoon that I'm sure will cover that in detail. And so Eurodoc polled and surveyed its member associations and ultimately produced a report with 10 major concerns raised by the different associations during this time. I won't cover those, but they'll be in the suggested reading that I post at the end. So in terms of actually this COVID-19 recovery, I mean, the bulk of the responsibility does lie with funders, policymakers, and institutions. They have the power to reshape and adapt some of the criteria and infrastructure so that researchers are not lost and we don't lose a whole generation. And Eurodoc, as part of the Initiative for Science Europe, or ISE, actually submitted a position paper to the European Commission, as you can see a few weeks back, where we highlighted the increased precarity of researchers, the fact that many of those researchers are funded by the European Commission, meaning that we'll lose the return on that investment. And of course, it's had a tremendous impact on mental health. But just because you're at home or unable to visit the research environment frequently, that doesn't mean that you can't engage in career planning. In fact, maybe this is a fantastic opportunity to do so. There is a huge array of different online tools, different groups, LinkedIn groups, career consultants, and so on, that you can access often for free, or at least maybe claim some of your own researcher funding, training funding that you perhaps are offered by your department. And finally, please, please, please join an early career researcher association. There are many scattered around Europe. Of course, you're also very welcome to be a part of Eurodoc. This is a fantastic opportunity to build a network, to have a peer support mechanism, and you learn so much more about what goes on in research, but also how you can succeed and get ahead. So otherwise, thanks for listening. As I said, I will post those hyperlinks in the chat afterwards. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Matthew, for this inspiring talk. There's so many ideas here. We have several questions. Let's move on. I have some questions myself too. So there is someone asking, what's the time frame? So Julia says, what's the time frame duration of your planned career transition? And I will join both questions from Julia. At what stage would you recommend to do a career transition?
In English, when people ask a question that has no quantifiable answer, we say, how long is a piece of string? This is, yeah, I mean, there's no perfect time, and I guess it depends a lot on your own personal situation. I myself actually am leaving at a time where I'm actually quite well protected in my own personal career, but I've identified things that matter more to me. And perhaps when you have that first reflection, like maybe the first time you give a talk to a non-academic audience and it really excites you, that's when you should start considering that you have passion, things that fulfill you, and you should start to really acknowledge that and start to pursue what options that potentially affords you. I would say that in my perspective, doing a postdoc has been very helpful because I could leave at any point. Obviously, if you're a doctoral candidate, If you do 99% of the PhD and leave with 1% remaining, you don't get your PhD. Whilst you can do 1% of a postdoc, you can absorb different things going on around the university without, let's say, the very specific goal of writing a thesis. And it gives you that opportunity to kind of search and look around. But yeah, there is no perfect time. But as I said, the worst time is the last possible moment. So it's Thursday today, maybe on Saturday morning, spend an hour and start thinking what you want to do next.
Yeah, that's true. There's also a question from David. How difficult is to come back to academia once you have left?
Yeah, that's a good question. I know that there are funding instruments in some countries where they have this intersectoral kind of element compensated for. So for example, if you've done a year in industrial research, I'm a life scientist, so it's quite common to go into the biotech industry. In many cases, actually, funders are waking up to the fact that these are very desirable people to have. So they create funding systems where you've done maybe 3 years as an industrial postdoc, and then you can apply now to take on, let's say, an assistant professorship back in academia. There are unfortunately some countries that employ stringent eligibility criteria. In Sweden, where I work, after your PhD, you have 5 years to become an assistant professor. After that, you're ineligible. We're not very fond of it as a rule in Sweden, but you have to acknowledge, that there are different criteria that unfortunately you can't compensate for. So it's good if you're planning that transition into industry, you should know, what kind of consequences it would have.
Yeah, that depends also on disciplines in some countries. Yeah, great. And there's also another question, which is interesting, because you have been talking about the stigma of working outside the academia, and Giacomo asked if you see any stigma in industry towards people coming from the academia. So it's the reverse stigma. For example, towards somebody who has just finished a PhD and applied for a job in a company.
So it depends, I guess, on the industry you're going for. But again, if I can use life sciences as a reference, the vast majority will be themselves ex-academics. So it would be rather hypocritical for them to have a stigma against somebody that was undertaking the same transition. In many cases, absolutely not. It's about how you adapt to that environment, but in many cases, the academic profile is extremely desirable. There's this robustness. I mean, COVID-19 highlighted how much research and the value of a well-validated truth is starting to be so increasingly valued in society as a whole. So you're seen as somebody that can improve the integrity and depth of work being done in that particular industry. So no, it is really not undervalued at all. You just need to know how to sell yourself. And unfortunately, it's the academic sector that is the more prejudicial and discriminatory, sadly.
Yeah, there's someone also talking about ageism, if it's a problem to do a research career.
Yeah, no, this is a very big topic in Eurodoc, and as I mentioned, with this 5-year rule in Sweden, it's something we're trying to embrace, which is, so ageism can be 2 things. It can be literally years since birth, or it can be academic age. That's the years since your PhD, and both are discriminatory. Obviously, just because you're starting a PhD aged 40, it doesn't mean that you're any less capable. In fact, maybe you have many life experiences and other professional experiences that should be integrated into academia and into research as a whole. And academic age, the idea of years post-PhD. So there should be a limit as to how many years you can be a postdoc, but it really shouldn't be especially stringent. We really need to ensure that you're not, let's say, prejudiced or penalized if you go into another field of work. We should be rewarding people taking on a new experience and diversifying, because otherwise we end up with a lot of circle pegs, as we say, and without great diversity amongst researchers.
Yeah, there's still another question talking about a very applied issue. So how to prepare your CV to apply for non-academic jobs because says Anna says some of us have not had many different positions within academia.
Yeah. So the crucial thing is that if you have not, let's say, for example, you are a PhD candidate right now, it's unlikely that you're going to have many different experiences. Maybe you'll have a master's, maybe not. It's important to try and do extracurricular things. So if there are associations, if there are organizations that are research aligned, then you can start to populate that CV with roles that are not necessarily jobs or doctoral positions that you took on. And then that starts to show that, wow, people are very impressed to see how many things you did at the same time. But also you then start to have this much more robust looking resume where you have a variety of different experiences and this willingness to really, go into depth of the whole research experience overall.
Yeah, that's a big issue because we still, I think, don't know what exactly companies look for when they hire a PhD holder. So because they look, they in some cases they say it's a requirement to have a PhD. In other cases they say it's desirable, but you still don't know what exactly they are looking for. So there is not much research on that. They want this kind, it seems that they looked at these transferable skills you referred to, but that's kind of, fuzzy issue.
Although, so Eurodoc is working with the European Commission, like Directorate General on Research and Innovation, and they're very keen to produce a skills roadmap, basically where academic and non-academic agents and stakeholders basically share key terms that they're used to working with in terms of applicants and candidates for specific positions, so that you can go on let's say the Erasmus website, which I think was in the links I posted, and you can understand, I put in here that I'm good at data analysis, and then over the page that will show you actually what that is normally called in an industrial setting, but also what sort of sectors value it. I can just tell you by default that industrial employers definitely value a PhD. It's just about trying to amplify and enhance what that PhD gave that is vital to them. Is that in many cases they just think of it as 3 letters and a very sort of senior education qualification, but actually you have to strip out of it and understand what are the things that you bring to that role. There will be many different things, and I guess
that's important. Yeah,
we'll speak about this later on. I think these transversal skills for doctoral candidates, to try and understand which are most tailored to different pathways.
Yeah, we have a session on that this afternoon. Yeah, and also a session on gender and career, research career, which is after yours. You've mentioned the precarity also, that this for women, especially this last year situation. So with the COVID, there are some data already available showing that probably women they had the worst part on that. There is a couple of questions still. So they say maybe it's easier if you have some years and industry experience before PhD. And there is also a question in the chat saying if doing a postdoc can actually hurt your career in the long run.
Yeah, so I'll take the first question from Marzan first. I can't give like definitive advice about years in industry before a PhD, but in many cases, PhDs now are becoming somewhat more industrial in their approach. So the European Commission funds these integrated training networks. You can do industrial doctorates, and now it's seen as you're bringing skills to the PhD that you probably wouldn't automatically have if you went straight from a master's, for example, and it's being appreciated. As I said, I can't exactly quantify how much, but no one's going to penalize you or discourage you from applying. And in response to this idea of doing a postdoc hurting you in the long run, I think we have to assess what is it that will hurt you? And in that situation, I think what many people refer to is that you become so specialized and so entrenched in what you do on a daily basis that you forget what you offer outside of that. And I'm aware of, in Sweden, for example, people that have had a research group deciding it's not for them, and then a year later they've got a new career path. Well, that's somebody that's done multiple postdocs, gone many years down the line. But what they ensured was that all along they had a diverse range of skills that allowed them to seamlessly move into something new. So in many ways, I think a postdoc can really help you because it gives you added time to work out what you're about so you can find the meaningful career path for you and not just jump into something because you had a terrible time in your PhD and you just want to get out.
Absolutely, yeah. There's also a question about how do you balance this? I think it's an important issue too. These extra activities and positions outside your research position with the pressure to conclude the research project and publish, which we have also a session tomorrow on publish and perish, which is true.
So there's a hell of a lot of luck involved in it, unfortunately. So I find myself in a quite a fortunate position where I have a supportive PI and the opportunity to pursue things myself. But if I can take like the average researcher, it of course is a balancing act, as you say. So it's perhaps about finding something that is easy to you, because if it's easy, then you're going to commit half as much time, but to do it properly. So for example, if you find it easy to discuss or like organize events, then you're going to find being part of, let's say, a doctoral candidate's careers organization much more easily, and you'll be able to build that into your life. I think the important thing is to also find tangible tasks, things that you can obtain or achieve without like really impacting on your research. So don't take on huge responsibilities. Move up gradually. If you just want to be part of something and just kind of look from the sidelines, if you want to be part of a chat group and just kind of perceive what's there, then that's enough. And I think you can even put onto your CV that you are a member of an organization, because at the very least you have extracted what they're discussing. Then as a year goes by, you might find, oh, I can do this. It fits into my schedule and so on. But yes, it is a balancing act, Joanna, and unfortunately, it's however you find the way of doing it.
Exactly. There's still another question. We are almost on time, but it seems there is a specific issue in some ways, and that's absolutely, I think, true. Have you had a lot of interdisciplinary discussions about career transitions?
Yeah, so Eurodoc has an interdisciplinarity working group, and absolutely, Fanny, you hit the nail on the head, because of course SSH, social sciences and humanities, are often completely overlooked in terms of the value of that academic trained industry. It's always seen as engineering and medicine and natural sciences because they kind of have this monetary value. But it's something that's I hope that as we have this growing transition or change in stigma about academics moving on into non-academic roles, that then they become more viable individual career pathways for these different disciplines. So my hope in answer to your question is that we have careers offices, and this just general thought about career progression becomes much wider and more diverse. Unfortunately, my own personal experiences in the life sciences, which is pretty straightforward for many people in terms of transitioning.
Yeah, but there's definitively an discipline issues on there. Yeah, and that's also the last question. Focus on this interdisciplinarity and maybe the situation. So Mauricio is saying that he has a bachelor degrees in music education, a master's degrees in ethnomusicology, finishing a doctoral in social pedagogy, which is more and more frequent, this kind of interdisciplinary background. And yeah, he says, it's not a matter, it's not like being from here or there. Maybe it's true.
Yeah, but I guess, you know, Mauricio, I actually identify with you a lot because I feel like I've involved myself in a lot of different extracurricular pursuits, but I'm still not entirely clear of where that lands me. And unfortunately, it is very hard to get somebody that can then guide you towards that. But I don't know whether it's something you've been engaging with, but on top of this whole CV rewriting and upskilling experience is the networking angle. I've been speaking to enough people in what I want to do to then start to shape, you know, where should I commit my attention to? And actually, and I know that it will start to help me avoid sending my resume to the wrong place, and get a greater understanding of, you know, kind of what is realistic. But I sympathize with you, and I can read now, you certainly have an impressive background in education. I just hope that you can find the right fit for you, and I'm sure it's there. It's just a matter of phrasing, and then often a certain elements of luck too.
So thank you very much. We are on time, so we have to finish. Thank you. That was a very interesting session. I just want to remark one thing that you said, and we have some data on that. Networking. Networking is so important within and outside the academia. And lobbying, I liked very much this idea of lobbying for change. You are the generation that has to change things. Thank you very much to all the participants that have been engaged through the session, and thank you very much to you, Matthew, for sharing with us your expertise.
It was a pleasure.
Bye-bye.